Colum McCann, June 15th, New York City.
Good evening, Colum McCann.
Good evening, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And how about you? How are you? And what are you feeling in the US today?
You know, it's interesting right now. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and for the past couple of months, people have been going to their windows at 7 o'clock every evening, and they've been hanging out the windows and rattling saucepans for the essential workers in the hospitals. Um, they've also been rattling saucepans for the protesters who have gone out on the streets and doing peaceful, lawful protest. And it's one of those moments when New York feels alive. New York just got it got concussed pretty seriously, and it was staggering to its feet after the or during the coronavirus because it's still going on. Um, and then it had the second wave of protests, which was another sucker punch. This is a very, very strong city, but I've never seen it so in such difficulty. But such difficulty also brings about joy at certain stages. And at 7 o'clock every evening, when people get together and ring out for one another, is one of those moments when I find it to be sort of powerful and optimistic, and I believe that we can recover from all of this.
You once told me that writing keeps you alive, that it's your heart and your soul. Why is it even more true today?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it's it's um, it's so necessary that we get to the heart of where we are. I want to say this. Increasingly, we're becoming people of single ideas, as if we're only one thing. You know, we're only white, we're only black, we're only Irish, we're only French, we're only this, we're only Muslim, we're only Jewish. But really, we're so much more than one thing. We're messy, we're contradictory. And literature, when it confronts the heartbreak of the world, also confronts the messiness of human experience. The fact that all of this is nuanced. There's no simple idea. And so the best literature, the most powerful literature, the most necessary literature is that which presents us with the human dilemma, doesn't necessarily give us answers, right? Because we don't necessarily have answers, but it poses questions to the times and to the nature of who we happen to be. So literature is our breath. Storytelling storytelling is the lungs of that breath.
Now, why is the arrival of coronavirus very symbolic of the title of one of your books, which is Let the Great World Spin, that received the National Book Award and was translated in French by Et que le vaste monde poursuive sa course folle at Belfond in France? Why is it so symbolic of what we're living today and of the world going on today?
Um, I love that line. Et que le vaste monde poursuive sa course folle, because it does seem that this big world of ours is pursuing some sort of mad agenda, and when I think about what's happening in the world today, probably for the first time in human history, nearly everybody on this planet is connected. We are all just a whisper away from being involved with one another. We are both meaningless. Like I look from above and it seems like we are just like these tiny bouncing atoms that are completely meaningless. We're also everything is meaningful at the same time, because everything that we do has consequences. Every time we leave a room, it has consequences. Every time we wear a mask, it has consequences. Every time we choose to say hello to someone, every time we choose to stand 6 feet away, it it could potentially have consequences. So this contradictory thing, this almost contradictory thing of being so meaningless, one of 7 billion bouncing molecules, and so meaningful, sort of come together, and they pose questions to us about who we are, what we are, and how we sort of look after one another. Right now, I'm in touch with a friend of mine who's a doctor in the COVID unit in Mount Sinai in New York. And because New Yorkers now are all wearing masks, and because we are mostly observing social distancing, the cases have gone way down. In the beginning, when people were maverick about it, when people didn't listen, it had severe consequences for all of us. And these times have a lot to tell us. And this curious mixture of the COVID and then the protests coming together, these very necessary protests, they're kind of aligned in a certain way, because I'm not sure that the protests would have been as loud or as noticed if we had all been going about our daily routine. If there had been no virus here, is it possible that we would have just ignored George Floyd? It is possible, but we didn't ignore what happened because we were indoors. We were looking at our machines. We were looking at the news, and we were so outraged about all of this. It was like a tsunami of things that came to this particular moment, and perhaps came to a really fundamental sense of change in the system of governance, in the way we police ourselves, in the way we look at one another, whether things come from a community base or whether they come from a base of power. And so much of this right now is about speaking truth to power.
Now, you were born in Ireland, and violence has always been very present, whether it was in your life or in your books. Today, you were speaking about George Floyd, it was his funeral. Why is it so symbolic of the violence and the hatred that goes throughout history?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly sad. This has been going on for a long, long, long time. People have been talking about it for a long time. The fact that we're waking up to it, the fact that we're confronting it, perhaps we hope that we can confront it, might represent a watershed for us. Because the fact of the matter is that we need to change, we need to turn, we need to pivot, and we need to look inside ourselves. And in particular, it's very true that people like me, middle-class white guys, living in New York and so on, well, we have to confront exactly what the story is and exactly how complicit we have been with our silence, because silence represents complicity, and it's important for us to speak up, but also to learn how to listen. I mean, this is one incredibly important thing. I run an organization called Narrative 4. And in this organization, we bring young people together from different parts of the world. And one example of this is we brought kids from the South Bronx together with kids from Eastern Kentucky. Now, the kids from the South Bronx, they're, primarily African-American and or immigrant. The kids from Kentucky are primarily white and or Cherokee Native American, right? These kids here are primarily blue or Democrat. These kids here are primarily red or Republican. These kids are urban, these kids are rural. They get together, you think they might not know one another at all. And sometimes they're terrified with each other at first. But when they get together and they step into one another's shoes, when they tell one another stories, that's when suddenly they realize that there is a level playing field. And that level playing field happens to be the fact that we are human. that sounds sentimental to some people. That sounds naff or twee or up in the air. But I genuinely think that storytelling has the power for us to understand one another. And increasingly, we have not been understanding one another. We have been hiding away from understanding. We've been saying, this is my world. Don't come in. I am comfortable in my own little box. But I'm sick and tired of boxes. And I think most people are actually sick and tired of the boxes that they get put in. So it's time for us to sort of rip open the boxes and say, I need to know you. And one of the things that literature does is it allows us to step into bodies and times and geographies that are not necessarily our own. But we have to go in with humility, and we have to go in with grace. You know, there's a lot of talk right now about, cultural appropriation. You know, stay away from my story. Well, I want to hear other people's stories, but the reason I want to go in to hear other people's stories is because I know my story is not good enough. I want to go in because I'm empty. And I want you to help fill me up, help fill my head up, help fill my heart up. Um, and you go in and you come in like this, you apologize and you say, I want to listen to you because I want to know you, because I need to know you, and we need to know one another. It's not about plundering. It's not about condescending. It's not about patronizing. It's about actually celebrating one another. So this idea, and I love the idea of those who talk about cultural appropriation, they're entirely right. It has happened for a long, long, long time. So let's turn this cultural appropriation notion into cultural celebration, and let's be powerful enough to try to do it.
This is exactly what you're doing in your latest novel called Apeirogon. It will come out in France in August at Belfond again. You show through the story of an Israeli and a Palestinian father who both lost their daughters in a dramatic way, that the world lies in our heads. How can you really try to break those walls through literature, through storytelling?
That's right. I mean, the walls are not only physical, and we all know about the wall in Israel, but the walls are mental and psychological as well. And this is a story about two men, Rami and Bassam, and their daughters Smadar and Abir, who are lost to the conflict. One is 15 years old, one is 10 years old. And instead of becoming natural born enemies, they become friends, and they travel the world talking, telling the story about what happened in order to use the power of their grief to shift other people's lives. So they use their power of their grief as a weapon for hope. And I met these guys, and I spent 4 years with them. They're extraordinary. This is a novel, but they are real people. And to me, they're along the lines of Martin Luther King. To me, they're along the lines of Gandhi or Arundhati Roy and what she does right now. They're speaking out. And what they say is, if we don't know each other above ground, we will end up knowing each other 6 feet below ground. So let's try to know each other now. Let's take the opportunity to, be courageous and acknowledge our difference. You don't have to be like me. I don't want to be like you. We're not all ever going to be the same. But what we need to do is, if we're going to save these other kids that we have around us or ourselves, we need to have the courage to talk to one another.
Now, this program is called SURSIS Story because everyone has a story, everyone has a different story. Through the association, your creative narrative for that you were talking about, you're giving a voice to youngsters, not only youngsters that have been to school, but also youngsters that we will never hear or see, that are totally lost for society. Why is it important to give a voice to all of them, to show that through writing, we can all have our own voice?
Because we want to save what we can, because we have to be decent to one another. We have to respect one another, and otherwise the alternative is the alternative is too awful to think about. If we continue to isolate ourselves, if we continue to clump in groups of people that are only like ourselves, if we continue to become nationalistic, and if we continue to become xenophobic, there's only one way that the world ends. The world is so much a better place when we expand our lungs, when we sort of like expand our understanding. And I mean that from a moral point of view, but I also mean it in terms of fun. I also mean it like, uh, let's talk. This is a big world. Let's live our lives out loud. Let's enjoy one another. And Walt Whitman says, every atom belonging to me is good as belongs to you. Well, certainly in America, these days, that's not as true as it used to be. And I would like to get back to that multitudinous aspect of the American character. I can't speak for what's happening in France. But even in Ireland, where so many people are coming indoors, shutting down putting the GPS on their imaginations, and you don't want to do that. The GPS, we should be getting lost every now and then. There's too much GPS being put on our heads and our hearts. So let's embrace the idea of loss once again.
When you launched this association, you did it with the Book of Men, which was translated by Être un homme. 75 writers participated into that to help you for this association. What does it mean for you being a man, and especially in those uncertain times?
Well, the reason we did that, How to Be a Man, was primarily it was because it was Esquire magazine was helping us to put all that together, and the theme of their issue was how to be a man. It's these days when you think about that question, it's so much more complicated, and I like the idea of like what is a man, rather than how to be a man. And I just think that we have to be as broad and as open to ideas of change as we can possibly be, open to ideas of gender, open to ideas of things sort of expanding in new and powerful ways. We can't remain stagnant, So if there are old notions about how to be a man that I might have had 20, 30 years ago that mean nothing to me now anymore. I change, and it's good that we embrace our ideas of change.
Speaking of change, in your new novel, you quote Rumi saying, "Yesterday I was smart, I wanted to change the world. Now I'm wise, I started to change myself." Why is changing starting with that? And in what way did you change those last months with everything going on, whether it's as a man or as a writer?
Well, I've been changed by these past few months. I've been humbled by these last few months. I've been scared by these past few months as well. This necessity to come indoors, to come inside and re-examine stuff was a scary notion for me. And they have been particularly tough times. But if you look at the protests that are going on, and the calls for racial justice and the calls for police reform and so on, these are good things where I'm learning to change my mind on certain things. And the idea of how do we police ourselves? Well, do we police ourselves from inside, or we police ourselves from outside? A lot of people are saying, wow, we need to police ourselves from inside. We need to have community. We need to have grace. We need to stop spending all this money on guns and people who are coming in from outside imposing order upon you. Let's impose order from within. Yesterday I was wise. I wanted to change the world. Today I'm even wiser because I want to change myself. So change from within first, in order for the change without to possibly occur. And we have to be open to this sort of stuff. And we have to be open to mistakes, and we have to be open to changing.
And do you think that it's going to change you as a writer too?
Yeah. I don't know how yet, but for sure, yeah. I wish I could say how. I mean, I'm searching for things, and I'm looking around. And the past is different right now. The past, the recent past, it's hard to even recall it, and the current present is very confusing. I like the idea of confusion, but I'm not sure where it's going to lead my stories or my storytelling.
We'll be following that.
Me too. If you have any stories for me, let me know, will you?
I will. Thank you so much, Colum McCann.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure.
For me too. And please take care. I wish you all the best.
And happy Bloomsday. It's Bloomsday tomorrow. June 16th is Bloomsday.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.